They called him the Ghost, not because of any spectral quality, but because of his utter absence of a distinguishable trait in a crowd. Sergeant First Class Bill the Ghost Kiley was a man built of quiet angles and hard-won silence. At 52, his body was a road map of service, knees that ached with the promise of rain, a hearing aid in his left ear from too many close-quarters discharges, and eyes that held the pale, unsettling calm of a high-altitude sky. He'd been pulled from a comfortable instructor billet at Quantico, much to his chagrin, and dropped into the sweltering, dust-choked chaos of forward operating base Shkin in eastern Afghanistan. The reason was simple. A new generation of Marine Corps snipers, part of a scout sniper platoon from 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, was facing an enemy they couldn't seem to outsmart. The problem was a specific stretch of terrain, a narrow, the boulder-choked valley locals called the Sangin Sap. It was a primary infiltration route for Taliban fighters and weapons moving in from the Pakistani border. The Marines had set up multiple hide sites, executed textbook stalking maneuvers, and possessed the finest optics technology the U.S. military could provide. Yet for 3 weeks straight, their quarry had eluded them. A critical target, a high-value Taliban commander known as the Tailor, was moving through the valley with impunity. He was orchestrating IED attacks on Marine patrols, and every time a sniper team got into position, the enemy column would either stop short, change its route, or simply vanish into the labyrinth of caves that pockmarked the cliffs. Morale in the platoon's sniper section was sinking. They were the best of the best, or so they'd been told. They'd aced their courses at SOI East and Scout Sniper School. And they could calculate windage in their sleep and group half-minute of angle shots at 1,000 yards. But out here, in the real world, they were being shown up by a man with a bolt-action rifle and a simple radio. The Ghost arrived without fanfare, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his personal M40A3 sniper rifle in a hard case. He didn't ask for a briefing. He just nodded at the platoon commander, found the sniper team's dusty corner of the command post, and sat down, listening. The 2 snipers he'd been sent to advise were Corporal Matt Garrow and Lance Corporal Dave Tex Johnson. Garrow was the spotter, a thoughtful kid from Ohio with a pair of keen eyes and a meticulous logbook. Johnson was the shooter, a lanky Texan with a swagger born of genuine talent, but not yet tempered by wisdom. They were a good team. The Ghost could see that. They had the fundamentals. What they lacked was the indefinable sixth sense, the ability to think not like a Marine, but like the man they were hunting. That evening, as the sun bled orange and red over the jagged peaks, the Ghost finally broke his silence. He didn't look at them, just stared out at the darkening valley. "Tell me about the Tailor. Not his weapons, his habits." Garrow flipped through his logbook. "He moves with a group of 8 to 10 fighters, always at dusk or dawn. They use the eastern wall of the valley, following the ridgeline about 2 clicks down, and then cutting into the cave systems near the base. We've tried 3 different hides, OP2, OP4, and the old goat herder's hut. Each time, they stop short. It's like they know." The Ghost was quiet for a long moment. "They do know. He's not stopping short because he sees you. He's stopping because he sees something you're doing without realizing it." "We're undetectable, Sergeant," Johnson protested, his Texas drawl thick with defensiveness. "We use ghillies. We move at night. We don't break the skyline. Our last hide was a natural depression covered in scrub. We were invisible." "Were you?" The Ghost's voice was a low rumble. "Or were you just hidden? There's a difference. Invisible means you aren't there. Hidden means you are, and he's just not looking in the right place yet. But he's a smart man, this Tailor. He doesn't look for a Marine. He looks for a place a Marine would hide." The next morning, the Ghost went out with them. They didn't go to a hide site. that instead the ghost led them on a long, grueling stalk through the Sangan sap. He moved like smoke, flowing from shadow to shadow, never pausing, never seeming to decide on a path. He just knew it. They crawled for an hour through a dry wadi, the gravel sharp against their bellies. They scaled a sheer rock face that Johnson would have sworn was unclimbable. Finally, they reached a small, exposed ledge about 2/3 of the way up the valley wall. It had no cover, no concealment. And they were completely in the open, lying flat on the baking rock. "This is crazy!" Johnson hissed. "We're sitting ducks!" "Shut up and watch," the ghost whispered. They lay there for 3 hours. The sun beat down mercilessly. Johnson's skin sizzled. Garrow's eyes ached from the glare. Just when Johnson was about to suggest they were on a fool's errand, movement caught his eye. A single goat, picking its way along a goat trail far below. He dismissed it. Then another goat appeared. And another. The herd was moving. But something was wrong. The goats were moving in a tight group, too tight. And one of them, the one at the back, moved with a slightly different gait. It was a man, hunched over, with a goat hide draped over his back, walking among the real animals. He was a scout. He passed directly below them, never looking up, because why would anyone be on that exposed, impossible ledge? The ghost waited until the scout was 100 meters past. Then he simply stood up, as he brushed the dust from his camis. "The tailor isn't looking for a hide," he said, his voice calm. "He's looking for the approach. He has a man, maybe two, walking point as animals hours ahead of his main group. They're watching for the signs you leave getting into your hide. The displaced pebble, the scuff mark, the crushed blade of grass. You're so focused on being hidden once you're in position, you're ignoring the trail you leave to get there." It was the first lesson. And the revelation was a physical blow to Garrow and Johnson. They had been so focused on the end game, the shot, that they had ignored the preamble. Their stalking was too perfect, too deliberate. They were leaving a signature in the terrain, a subtle but readable story of their passage. The enemy scout wasn't looking for a Marine. He was looking for a story that didn't belong. Over the next 2 weeks, the ghost deconstructed everything they knew. He taught them to move without purpose, not to meander like an animal, to leave a chaotic, unreadable trail. He taught them to use the land not as cover, but as a partner, letting its natural features dictate their path, not their intended destination. He had them practice shooting from the impossible, the steep, unstable slope, the exposed ridgeline, the position a textbook would tell you to avoid. "The tailor's men have read your textbook," he'd say. "Don't write them another chapter." But the real lesson, and the trick that would finally bring them to the critical target, came not from a field exercise, but from a conversation. They were back at the FOB cleaning their rifles. Johnson was complaining about the heat, the dust, the chafing of his gear. "It's the light," Johnson muttered, scrubbing at his bolt. "This time of day, the sun just bounces off everything, ruins your depth perception." The ghost, who had been meticulously cleaning the trigger assembly of his M40, stopped. When he looked at Johnson, then at the low, harsh sun slanting through the dusty air of the CP. He looked at Garrow's logbook, with its detailed notes on wind speed, humidity, and barometric pressure. Then he looked back at the sun. "You're wrong," the ghost said softly. "It's not ruining your perception. It's showing you something you're not seeing." He stood up and walked to the entrance of the tent, staring out at the valley. "Get the target dope for OP Raptor," he ordered. "Out now." Garrow scrambled to produce the folder. For the next hour, the ghost had them go over every observation they'd ever made from that position. They talked about the light at dawn, at noon, at dusk. They talked about how the shadows fell, how the rocks changed color, how the dust devils formed. "The tailor moves at dawn or dusk," the ghost said, more to himself than to them. Low light, long shadows, classic tactical movement. But he's not avoiding your eye. He's avoiding your optic. He knows how glass works. He knows the sun catches a lens and throws a beacon for miles. You've been paranoid about glint, so you set up with the sun at your back to hide your scope. Textbook. He turned to them, and for the first time, a thin, hard smile touched his lips. But if the sun is at your back, it's in his eyes. He can't look into the sun and see you. But here's the thing he's not accounting for. He's not worried about you seeing him. He's worried about you seeing his scout. The scout isn't looking into the sun. He's using it. He's using that harsh light to hide his own movement, to blind you to the subtle signs. He knows your eyes are full of glare and shadow. The revelation clicked into place in Johnson's mind. So we don't look for him in the light. We look for where the light is wrong. The ghost nodded. Exactly. The tailor's trick isn't his movement. It's his shadow, not his literal shadow, but the absence of it. He knows how light works. He knows where shadows should fall. He stays in them. He merges with them. But to do that, he has to follow the terrain the shadows create. The scout does too. So you stop looking for a man. You start looking for a shadow that doesn't move with the sun. The next day, they planned the mission. Intelligence confirmed the tailor would be moving a large shipment of IED components in 2 days. The chosen location was a new hide, not a pre-existing OP. The ghost selected it himself. Now, it wasn't on any map as a viable position. It was a narrow cleft in the rock high on the western wall that faced directly into the setting sun. It was the worst possible position by every conventional standard. It was perfect. The stalk was brutal. They had to approach from the north, traveling light, moving only in the full light of day when the enemy's observation would be at its most complacent. The ghost led, moving with a strange, fluid indirection, as if he were just another part of the landscape being pushed by the wind. They reached the cleft an hour before dusk. The space was so tight that Johnson, who would be the shooter, could barely bring his rifle to bear. Garrow had to lie partially on top of him to use his spotting scope. The sun was a molten ball of fire directly in their faces. The glare was blinding. Heat shimmered off the rocks, distorting the view into a wavering liquid mess. "I can't see a thing," Johnson muttered. His eye pressed to the scope, the rubber eyepiece already hot to the touch. "Don't look at the ground," the ghost whispered from behind them. "Look at the shadows on the wall. Look for the place where the shadow has a shape that doesn't fit." Johnson fought the instinct to squint, to look away from the blinding light. He forced his eye to remain on the scope, to let the glare wash over his vision. He unfocused his gaze, letting the eastern wall of the valley become a blur of orange and black. And then he saw it. A flicker, not a movement but a static anomaly, a patch of shadow on the rock face, about a click down the valley that was just slightly too regular. It was a vertical stripe of darkness in a world of jumbled, chaotic shadows. "Contact," he breathed. "East wall, base of the scree field, shadow anomaly." Garrow shifted his spotting scope, fighting the same blinding light. I don't see it. Wait. Yeah, I got it. It's stationary. No, it's moving, slow, inch by inch. Following the shadow line of that overhang. It's him. It's got to be the scout." The sun dipped another fraction of a degree. The shadows on the eastern wall began to stretch and change. The anomaly moved with them, perfectly matching its pace. It was a man, draped in dark cloth, moving with the shadows as if he were part of them. He was a ghost himself. He passed the base of the scree field and paused at the mouth of a small cave, invisible from any other angle. He waited. A few moments later, yet the main column emerged. They didn't walk in the open. They materialized from the cave itself, men in dark clothing, weapons at the ready. At their center was a slightly taller figure, walking with a confidence the others lacked. The tailor. The range was extreme, nearly 1,200 meters. The light was deteriorating. The shot was through a river of shimmering heat mirage. Every variable was wrong. But Johnson wasn't looking at the variables anymore. He was looking at the target's shadow. He watched as the tailor paused for a moment, his figure merging perfectly with the dark mouth of the cave. But his shadow, cast by the dying sun at their backs, was thrown forward onto the dusty floor of the valley. A long, distorted silhouette that was utterly separate from the darkness of the cave. Johnson's crosshairs weren't on the man. They were on the shadow. He held his breath. Let the crosshair settle on the point where the silhouette's chest would be if it were a solid thing. Moen began the gentle, rhythmic press of the trigger. The crack of the M40 was deafening in the confined space. The bullet, a .338 Lapua Magnum, traveled the distance in just over a second. It passed through the heat waves, through the dying light, and found its mark. It didn't hit the tailor in the chest. It hit the cave wall a foot to his left. A miss. But the tailor flinched. He didn't go to ground. He didn't know where the shot came from. He just took a single, startled step to his right, out of the cave's shadow and into the full, horizontal light of the setting sun. For one brief, perfect second, he was no longer a man merged with darkness. He was a man in the light, his outline sharp and clear. It was the one thing he never did. It was the one thing his lifelong trick of using shadow could not account for. He had been startled out of his nature. Johnson didn't think. His body, trained and retrained by the ghost's relentless drills, acted. He didn't reacquire the target. He simply moved the crosshairs a fraction of an inch to where the man in the light now was and pressed the trigger again. The second shot was true. The tailor crumpled, a dark heap on the dusty valley floor. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the valley erupted. The enemy fighters scattered, firing wildly into the rocks at nothing. Garrow was whispering into the radio, calling in the hit. Johnson just lay there, his heart hammering against his ribs, his eyes still welded to the scope, and watching the spot where the man had fallen. The ghost placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture of contact. "You didn't shoot the man," the ghost said, his voice low and even. "You shot his habit. That's the only way to win out here." They exfiltrated under the cover of darkness, moving not like hunters, but like the hunted, silent and swift. Back at the FOB, there were no celebrations. The intel guys confirmed the kill. The tailor was dead. The IED attacks in the sector would drop by 70%. But for Garrow and Johnson, the victory was a quiet one, an internal one. They had learned the difference between being a sniper and being a ghost. They had learned that the greatest trick wasn't in the shooting, but in the seeing. And they had learned it from a man who had seen it all, a man who had taught them that the most critical target isn't the one you see, but the one you understand. The ghost didn't say another word about it, and the next morning he was gone, headed back to his quiet instructor billet, leaving behind 2 young Marines who would never look at light or shadow the same way again.